Hi, and welcome to the Thoughtful Software Podcast. My name is Fahad Shokat, and joining me is Andrew Wolf, CEO of SkipList. This podcast is all about building incredible and thoughtful software. In this episode, we speak with Brian Ellis, CTO of Bezlio, a mobile-first, low-code development platform to visualize data. It's a really interesting discussion on the importance of data-driven decisions. So we get into why data is such a powerful tool to enable any organization to make better informed decisions. So, rather than relying on your gut, use data to your advantage. We discussed that and many, many other things, and we discussed some of the challenges that you should be aware of. But one thing is for sure, data should be taken seriously and be used as a strategic advantage. So we hope you enjoy. Here's Brian giving us an intro to Bezlio. Here we go.
My name is Brian Ellis. I'm the Chief Technical Officer here at Bezlio. And, to dig into what Bezlio is, we probably have to back out a little bit to talk about the company that we founded Bezlio from. So about, 2002, so I always say 15 years, but it seems like we're quickly approaching a lot longer than that. Myself and my brother and another set of brothers started a company called SaberLogic, and we based it here in Northeast Ohio, and our focus was helping small and mid-sized manufacturing companies learn to use technology better. That started because we were founded out of another manufacturing company, a small manufacturing company in the region. And what we saw was that a lot of those manufacturing companies were pretty far behind in technology. So, the tech kept marching forward and they just kept getting left behind. You'd walk into these companies that are using technology that's, a good decade behind what consumers were using. So that really started SaberLogic. And during that time, we grew to a pretty good sized practice. I think we had about 23 consultants. And we kept seeing some of the same problems. So we worked, internationally. We worked with companies all over the globe, and a lot of startups and things like that. And one of the biggest problems we saw was people didn't know how to use mobile tech, and software vendors weren't keeping up with it. So you'd walk in there and employees would have no way of using a cell phone, no way of getting that kind of data delivered to them if they're outside of the office, short of like kludgy VPNs and stuff like that. So seeing that as being a need, we started working on Bezlio. And what Bezlio is a low/no code mobile software development platform is probably the best description of it. So it's allowing businesses to take their existing data from accounting systems, CRM systems, ERP systems, basically any systems that they already use, and be able to take that and put it onto smartphones and put it in the hands of their users from anywhere without having to do like complex like data synchronization or moving their data to the cloud. It works with their data right where it's at.
When I worked at Tableau, that was the number one issue, was getting access to the data. I think once you gave it the tool to the people, they loved being able to visualize their data, but you have to get the data to visualize it. And so being able to do that with low or no code is a game changer, especially in the manufacturing field. And tech companies usually have an engineer or two to get the data for you. At a manufacturing company, they probably barely have IT staff, let alone software developers.
Yeah. Really, like our ideal customer is somebody that has like an IT administrator or something like that. That's pretty technical, but they're not like, a full-on developer. Because we did projects for like smartphone development for these companies and stuff like that. And what's crazy about it is you probably spend a good 75% of the time is just building out the framework. And the framework is pretty much the same for everybody. They want to be able to authenticate. They need to figure a way to get access to their data. They need to have like a landing page and all this other kind of stuff. So people would pay to have that done over and over and over again. And even though like the toolkits were getting better, there at the end, we're using technology like Ionic and stuff like that. And even now you get like progressive web apps or PWAs and stuff like that. But it's still a lot of plumbing that just people don't need to do. So really Bezlio started off just providing that plumbing. And what it really was a way for people to be able to use Angular-based applications on smartphones, and they act exactly like any other smartphone app. It has offline support, it does write-back caching and things like that, because a lot of our customers would also be like field service or, in the oil and gas industry. So they're trying to access this data where they may not have cell phone connectivity or any kind of data connectivity. So we spent a lot of time really trying to engineer that into it as well, where really the data works wherever you're at.
So now that people have access to that data, right? Like, what kind of outcomes are you seeing? Like, what that data-driven decision, right? Where you're moving into this digital age where everybody is expected to be making data-based decisions. Previously you might not have been able to, but now there's databases, proliferation of data, big data, all that buzzword soup. But what are you seeing? What kind of outcomes when people have Bezlio versus when they don't?
Yeah, I think where Bezlio really, really shines is largely in gathering and generating data, and especially from the field. So being able to access that data is certainly like an important piece to it. But what we really see for people that use Bezlio is like their field service people will be out on the road, and instead of having to like call back to the office or, jump on their laptop to see where they need to go next, they can just get it delivered directly to them. Be like, all right, you finished this job, bang, here's your next one. Here's the address. Here's a link to click on, and Google Maps will take you automatically there and stuff like that. But then once they're out in the field, what we largely see companies have a hard time doing is collecting data. And that is something that Bezlio can really, really help them with. An example that I had before was, these companies would be running manufacturing and production and stuff like that, but they could never tell you like how long a project actually took, like how long did it take to run that job. And they'd be like, well, it takes our employees too long to collect that data. And a lot of that's just failings on other software and stuff like that of not being easy enough to collect that data quickly. But really about being able to, we always use this adage when I did consulting, I'd tell people to match the transaction to the action. So you're pulling something off the shelf. You want to do the transaction right there, both for timeliness of your data, but also to make sure that you're collecting it. A lot of these companies would do something what they call back flushing. And basically what that means is that you're saying, I pulled a stopwatch out one time and I tracked how long it took me to do this operation. And then anytime I calculate labor against that later on, I'm just using a standard. I'm just using that stopwatch. But what you lack and what you really miss is, the minutia of day-to-day activities that different employees run at different times. If there's work stoppage events or things like that, what we really found is that what companies lacked more than anything else was data. And then you get into the idea of data-driven decision-making, but you got to start by gathering the data. So, both in terms of being able to put the data into the user's hands, but also collect it from their hands ends up being a really big piece to it.
So looking at data, you want to present it in a, that's what you're doing, right? Presenting data and having people make decisions based on it. But how do you know the data is good? Like, there should be some checks and balances, or, your data can tell you anything or a number of things. So, how do you kind of figure that out?
Yeah. And that's where I think that for a lot of companies, they need to focus on collecting data and hopefully minimizing user input. Another common thing that we would tell people to look for whenever we would be doing like ERP or any kind of like process consulting is, use humans where you need human decision making and use computers for everything else. So like with the idea of like time tracking to know how long it takes to produce one part, that's an instance where you're not asking an employee to say, it took me 15 minutes, it took me 20 minutes or anything like that, but you're actually using a clock. So you're time stamping it and then you're tracking that kind of stuff through. Digital scales, being able to use like hardware tags that have like environmental information, like temperature, weight, anything like that you can add in to automate the data collection, ends up becoming really big. You should really only be asking users for input where users need to be giving input, and everything else you can make much, much, much better data by collecting it automatically than by asking users to enter things in, because anytime you get user interaction, then you also have user error.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because you could have people who have a judgment about something, right, of some, number, and they could make the data support their argument, right? But if you have something that's already built in, then you kind of take that out of the equation.
Yeah. One of the things we're trying to push some people to try out with our platform is even using things like even further automating how you collect like time records or anything like that, because you can use there's these things called like low power Bluetooth emitters, but what really matters about that is that you could collect a user's time based on their vicinity around a job. So that way they're not even clicking to start an action or to stop an action. It's purely based on their, like, if they're near that work center, it just collects that time automatically. Because we've seen this even in companies that are particularly advanced in how they do their time tracking. Let's say you have one employee and they're running 3 machines simultaneously, which you run into a lot. At the end, then you have to ask a user what that split is. And again, when I look at it, when I think about technology, I think, how can we get away from that? How can we pull the user's interaction out of there? And you could automate, data collection by a lot of different ways of doing it. And that gets back to your point of making good data, is I really think as much as you can is by doing passive data reading, kind of like that IoT concept, then you're also improving the quality of the data that you get. And then you can use tools like, again, Bezlio can help you with data analysis. But even for more hardcore companies, people that get into Tableau and stuff like that, it starts with having the data, and then you can slice and dice it a million different ways to find out the answers to the questions that you're really trying to solve.
So that's a really good point. Collecting data and good data, probably fundamental. But I like to say it's the distance between data and the information you get from the data that's oftentimes the hardest part. There are entire fields. You can spend 15 years studying data science and the art of getting information from data. But if you're not a data scientist and you are somebody whose job is to climb a telephone pole, for example, critical that you have the right data at the right time so you don't fall off or get electrocuted. But what guidelines, how do you help people get that information? And what do you tell people when they're aiming to get this newly collected data and turn it into something useful?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And that's one that a lot of companies struggle with. We're seeing data scientists as being one of the more important aspects to companies that are often overlooked. And one of the things that we do a lot is that we recommend companies at times will outsource that, but it's letting them know that there's a need to do that, because the problem that you'll run into is people doing data analytics. Like, I think that there's 2 different things. Bezlio gives you like transactional data, so it's putting that data in the user's hands. But your data scientist is doing more where they're really ripping ideas apart and taking a bunch of different slices at it and things like that. And that's where software like Tableau does a fantastic job at being able to do that kind of thing. But what you run into is that people who aren't trained enough tend to make some pretty consistent mistakes in their data analysis. Because they don't know the back end to it. I think that I've talked a lot to people about one of the things that when we hire, I wish that I could get more of, or I wish that people had a better understanding of, was general statistical analysis. A lot of people have started talking about the idea of, like, in schools and things like that, changing your high-end math courses from like calculus to statistics. because that is honestly, now I'm a technical person, so I live off of data, and I trust data more than I trust anything else. But it's easy if you allow yourself to make those kind of mistakes, to make wrong assessments because you just don't understand data analysis. The easiest one that everybody always talks about is like correlation does not prove causation, that you can't look into that too much. But even simple things like, being able to calculate like confidence intervals from using standard deviations and things like that. That is how you get real analysis. That's how you get real understanding. And as a way of that, I really think the companies should be partnering up, or if they're large enough, hiring the right people to help them do that data analysis instead of just assuming that they can do it internally. To me, that's a little bit like a company that just comes up and they're like, oh, well, or a person being like, well, it turns out I have cancer. So, I think this is the treatment that I'm going to do. And it's like, well, no, there's people that are like far more educated that have really like looked into this, who understand some of the pitfalls that you'll find yourself in, if you go down that path. So I think that really making sure that you've got the right partners and the right people to help you understand data concepts, and that allows you to get to that point where you can use those to make more informed decisions.
Pivoting from data to mobile, we're seeing a lot of mobile adoption. Every client we talk to is like, is this mobile enabled? Mobile apps is on the top of mind, like blockchain and AI. It's right there. How do we get more mobile? How do we adopt it? What challenges do you see with mobile adoption? And seeing so you're mobile first, you probably have a good insight into it.
Yeah, and that is part of, that gets part of like the origin story of Bezlio as well, is that like the systems that we worked with, like the best systems that we worked with that integrated well into companies were customizable. And one of the problems we saw is that the mobile app market, especially the enterprise mobile app market, was very, very, very segmented. So you would have like a best of breed application to do a very small part of the overall process. And then on top of that, they weren't customizable. So it's like you get this application, the application is the way that it is because it's distributed through the App Store. So everybody has to have the same experience. And, we've seen people trying to solve that, trying to fix that. And, so Bezlio, when we built it, the whole idea was that you could customize it from the absolute ground up. Because I think to get businesses to really take off and be able to use smartphones, the application has to match their process flow. You can't just come in and be like, hey, everybody's going to run the same process flow. It was, as an ERP implementer, it was one of the things that drove me absolutely crazy, is that you'd have these companies come in who are like large software vendors, and they would say, all right, we have these defined best practices, so we're going to put you on best practices so that you can run our software better. And, you can't tell me that a company that manufactures planes and they manufacture just a couple a year, and a company that manufactures like shims or something like that, like that their best practices are the same. So really making software that can evolve and meet how businesses actually do things is, I think, a really important part to that getting taken off. And I think that's why, when we started doing this, like we started this in 2016, we were very early into the scene. We were just starting to tickle into this idea. And since then, you've seen companies like Microsoft and Google trying to also get into this no/low code development environment, because they realize that there's a big need there for people to be able to come out with simple mobile interfaces to their existing data. But I think a lot of those are still missing a really core element in that they require you to work off of cloud data. And what we wanted to say is that, in the real world, people have data everywhere. There's Excel spreadsheets, there's, databases, and there's cloud data, and you need to be able to combine those all together into one flow that works really well.
I read this interesting statistic that said like 58% of companies in the survey kind of use their gut feel or experience to make decisions or at least half of their decisions are based on gut feel.
Yeah.
So like, I think what you're kind of touching on is how do you, like my question is like, how do you implement a culture of data-driven decisions? Is it just as simply as like Bezlio is making it easy to, put these, the charts together? Is that the biggest issue?
Yeah, when I talk to people about data-driven decision making, one of the things that I like to bring up is that, you say those numbers like 50, 60, 70% of decisions are just made by gut feel based on how somebody feels about a certain way. But if you could re-ask that question, I would probably, if you go up to any of those employees that are making those gut level those like gut decisions, and you would ask them like, if you had data that you could analyze to make that decision, like, would you rather have that? And I think the answer, like across the board, is yes. I think that people would rather make decisions off of data. The problem is they don't have data to make decisions off of. Or they don't have it may not be boiled down enough for them. If you have an IoT device that's making thousands and thousands and thousands of records, they need somebody to do a little bit of analysis for them. But I think that people want to make data-driven decisions, especially as they understand data concepts. And I think that, what I tell people also is that if you don't, like your competitors will. And they'll find value out of that, and they're competing against you, and that could be a competitive advantage for them. I think that when I entered into technology, around around like Y2K and all that kind of stuff, when I was working at a college, people were just starting to look at IT as not being a cost center, but potentially being a competitive advantage. And I think that's only pushed forward, and companies that are the next generation companies are the ones that are really embracing that idea that technology can make you better. It can make you better at anything you do. And this is, I guess, part of just my philosophy coming through, but it's like, it's there, use it. And if you're not, your competitors will. So at least think about that fact. You may be winning now, but that doesn't start somebody who's in, some new kind of upstart and coming in and just doing it better. And, you can use a lot of history to kind of show that, where there were defined industries that existed for, a long time. And then an upstart comes in that looks at the reality a little bit differently, and that embraces technological change, and they'll just come in and just wipe out existing industries. And we see that on a smaller scale typically, because we see it company from company. But history is full of good examples of that, of people that are just willing to make that leap first, and that gives them such a competitive edge that they'll get a head start, and then you can't catch back up with them.
One of the things I find fascinating with the data is, if you over rely on the past, that can be troublesome, right? But, being predictive, looking into the future and taking this data and making decisions on, something that, strategically, like I think I read some example about like Walmart in preparation for a hurricane, instead of just like going off of gut feel, like what they should stock in their shelves, they found out that during a hurricane, people really like to buy strawberry Pop-Tarts and beer.
Yep.
Right. And so like, it's also about service, right? Data will help you service your customers better in crisis, things like that. But also just like, better decisions, better customer service. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that example because it's such a succinct example of companies being smart about how they use technology and using that to gain understandings that they wouldn't have otherwise. And this is where, like machine learning, or, generally, like I'll put quotation marks around it, but artificial intelligence, but I'm not a huge fan of the phrase, really come into play of where things are at now, because what they basically do is, or any kind of, data analytics really gets into this idea, just automates it a little bit better, is collecting a lot of data with a lot of disparate points, and you don't know which ones of those are going to be valuable. But then you can use data analytics techniques or machine learning or anything like that to dig through that data and find those trends that you wouldn't understand in general. Like, yeah, when a bad storm is coming, people buy strawberry Pop-Tarts. So let's stock up on strawberry Pop-Tarts when we know those things are coming in. I think that companies need to be getting wise to that idea now to start generating the data. Because otherwise, as these, as machine learning algorithms and statistical analysis algorithms and software for data analysts, for data analytics continues to improve, it's going to really, really, really benefit those companies that have already been gathering data. Preferably for like 2 years would be ideal for a lot of companies that are coming in with data that are trying to look for, unforeseen trends and stuff like that. So that's one of the things I try to talk to people about now is, you have to get ready now. I think that companies should look at data that they can generate almost like it's an asset that they can create themselves. That asset may not be super, super valuable just yet. I mean, I think that there is a lot of good stuff there where companies could analyze it and make new understandings and new learnings by generating the data now. But I think if you really look into the future, and especially like 2 years out or something like that, these machine learning algorithms are continuously advancing at a very, very rapid pace, so that people who are generating data now will be able to take advantage of that new software, those new understandings and that new learning way quicker, and they'll be able to outcompete a lot of other people by using that asset that they're basically banking now.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like it's a strategy. Like data will help you make decisions and keep you more competitive.
Yeah.
You also, by the way, made our podcast about 100 times smarter by saying artificial intelligence.
Andrew and I have had plenty of conversations about artificial intelligence and stuff like that in the past. And, it's one of these weird things that I was actually in prep for this podcast. I was kind of thinking about, because one of the things that you see a lot of people look and complain about is they're like, well, artificial intelligence isn't, is it not playing out? Is it, was it all hype and stuff like that? Which I think in the tech world is a very reasonable question to ask. But it's also that we expect innovation to happen so fast now. Like we innovate, technology, and the technology like innovation interval is just shortening and shortening and shortening. So people see that and they hear about like, some early neural nets getting created or something like that. And they think, all right, well, within 2 years, like where's my robotic buddy that's automatically doing all this for me? And the reality is it's like, it's coming. It's just that some of these things are a little bit bigger than others. I think that you could look at a lot of what they're trying to do with like, artificial general intelligence or anything like that is kind of like them making quantum computing. Is like right now there's a lot of theory, and I'm a hobbyist in machine learning and stuff like that a little bit more. But you see what people are doing. It's like right now it's a lot in academia, and it's a lot of like research and research papers and stuff like that. But you're seeing this continual march toward the future where we're going to be able to use computers to do a lot more for us. But the one thing that I think anybody who's ever looked at anything about AI or machine learning will tell you is one of the first things is they are data hungry. The more data you can feed them, the better results you get, 100% almost, across the board. And for a lot of companies that are looking at it or considering it, I think generally they're not collecting enough data to get the kind of value that they're hoping to get out of it. And now's the time to start, storing.
That entire answer sounds really smart, except you didn't mention blockchain a single time, so therefore it's wrong. And I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, it's all, that is the one thing that like I could just do on the, like, in podcast form or anything else is like, I should just throw as many buzzwords in as I possibly can. we're really, changing the curve on our blockchain, artificial intelligence, integration platform here that we're working on or something like that. All of a sudden, money is just flying at me through the doors.
Buy into our ICO. I promise it's going to work out.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Meanwhile, I'm going to take me a nice long vacation. Don't worry about it.
Where am I headed? Not telling you.
Yeah, exactly. Somewhere without extradition.
So one thing I wanted to touch on too, like if it seems like if you're, let's say, an enterprise, you already have a lot of data or should have a lot of data to access the data. What do you do if you're a startup? You're kind of new to the game. You don't have a lot of data to track. What are some of the use cases that you can kind of fall into?
What's funny is that, so we had this discussion at work the other day, because for most people, the hardest part is the first step. And they spend so long, we in the industry, or I'm sure you guys know this, it's like you call it like paralysis by analysis, where people spend so long trying to figure out what data they should collect and everything like that, that they never just start collecting. And I do think it's important to be mindful of it in general, but I think it's for most companies, it's more important just to start. Is where you see data being generated is start capturing. It doesn't mean that you have to use that data. It doesn't mean that data is always going to be in that format. It doesn't mean that data means anything or anything like that. But the most important part is to start. So for us, with inbound leads, one of the things that I challenge the company with is taking those and asking the first 5 questions of qualification. And, so we had some categories of like what types of answers we're trying to get, not the answers we're necessarily getting, but what we're trying to derive from those answers, and saying, all right, we're just going to start with 5. And after we get some, we're going to test those against, we're going to correlate those against some things that we're trying to predict and see if there's value there. And if not, we're going to change them up. It's a lot of get started. If you're a startup, if you're an existing company or anything like that, is get started now. And the other side of it in terms of where to begin your focus, for most companies, that breaks down into 2 different things. One is, what is the most important business value drivers? So like for us, it's sales, it's, leads, because we're kind of like a greenfield technology. It's a lot harder for us to get leads than it is to close them. So once we get those leads in, to qualify them quickly and to find out how they found us and everything else about it. So one is like the value drivers for the business, things like that. And then the other is cost centers, is really taking a look at it and figuring out where your cost centers are, and then using those to drive the kind of data that you need to pull out. So for us, like for the software development side of things, we do agile software development, we do Scrum. So like a core information for me is how many story points or whatever we're completing per day, so that we can start looking at it and then start building off of that to see like, all right, what days are working, what days aren't working, and just starting the data collection technique will help you also put the processes in to help you generate better data.
Can you set up a system where you're collecting data and you have this information, but then the system automatically makes like decisions or can make recommendations on what to do?
Yeah.
With the data?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that this is an area that I'm shocked how far behind the general technology platforms are from where some of their competitors are at. So an instance for me that I think a lot of companies should consider is in the field of e-commerce data analytics, market basket approaches and like parts that sell well with each other, or customers that aren't buying parts that should, based off of all of these other things, like kind of what they call like a product recommendation engine, is something that I think most companies would really get a lot of value out of. And it's established truth. And they already have the data. So this is the craziest thing to me is that, you talk to some of these companies is, established truth. Companies like Amazon have been working on and actually publish and make available their product recommendation engines and strategies just right out there. And in terms of having the data, most companies that sell anything at the very least have a ledger of who their customers are and what they've bought and when they've bought it. And it's a pretty simple step from there to say you should be able to take that data from your existing systems and use those algorithms that already exist. And these aren't even machine learning algorithms. I mean, they can be, and some of the most powerful ones are, but there's plenty of other just pure statistical analysis techniques that exist out there that companies aren't using on the data that they already have that could give them such huge insight into their customers, what their customers buy, what they are not selling customers that other customers that are similar are buying. And for something like that, I mean, it's not a big project and the science is proven and the data is there. It just takes people to say, hey, yeah, this is a good idea. Let's find out how to do this on a grander scheme. I think for a lot of people that really want to get into it, sales information is one area that there's a lot of data that exists into and the companies can get a lot of value out of. Like if I was using an ERP or an accounting system or something like that, and I was putting an order in for a customer, like I think it should pop up the same way that if I go to Amazon and say, hey, customers that bought this usually also buy this. And based on this customer's past information, they may also be interested in these things. It's two simple things based off of proven technology, proven data science that people could implement in and could help them sell more. But what you get is some of that reluctance where salespeople are like, oh, I know my customers. And it's like, if you have 5, that's probably true. If you have 100, like I bet you're missing something, and things like that. So, I think that it's just important. Data-driven decision-making in general is that companies should be looking at all of the decisions that get made. So that's usually, upselling a part is a decision that's typically made by a sales rep or by a salesperson. And you're not giving them the tools to make data-driven decisions, to try upselling into something, or to ask a salesperson to say, hey, customers with this typical profile also buy this part, but they're not buying this part from you. Are they getting it somewhere else? Is it, is there something else? If we never offered it to them, did they not know that? That's the thing about data-driven decision-making is that you're not just making the decision for a person, you're giving a person the tools to make a more informed decision with data.
So kind of as we wrap up the year, we're always interested in things that are kind of upcoming and new trends for 2019. Mm-hmm. I like the low code or no code applications. I think those are not going anywhere anytime soon, and that's probably going to be a big part of software moving forward.
If people want to know the future of software development, a good thing there's a couple different things. One is that I go to GitHub's trending repositories and I check that weekly to see kind of what repositories are growing out there, what people like. We use GitHub both for our code management and we have some open source repositories out there around our product line. But GitHub will largely tell you, kind of what people are excited about, what people are working on. You can always see TensorFlow out there because that's like one of the biggest projects out there. But the other one is really watching what gets included into WebKit. Because that right now, WebKit on iOS and Android and Chrome and, all those WebKit compatible browsers, they're defining a lot of the future of software development. And so you can see the things that are happening there. And a lot of times those fall underneath the scope of what people are really excited about. So like blockchain and AI, everybody's hot on that idea because they're really big concepts. But we're using a technology right now called web components. And we're doing that to automatically upgrade our client experience. So anytime the user's online, it's pulling web components to make the app more up to date. I'm not sure if that's how Facebook works, but you can see like how some of those apps work where they're automatically updating themselves and you don't have to update them through the App Store. And web components allow you to do that. It's a new feature in some browsers. You're seeing a lot more of it, but it's going to change the way that web software development is done entirely. For people who know any kind of like HTML or anything like that, like how there's like a label tag or anything like that. Basically, it allows you to write your own software that injects your own tags that work in HTML then. But what people are seeing is that gives them a huge amount of power over the browser, makes it much easier to distribute code, makes it much easier to kind of containerize your code and things like that. So, what I'd recommend people to do is to keep an eye on WebKit and what's happening there. Look at web component frameworks right now. They're super fresh. We use Angular Elements as a version of it. We use a different one called Stencil, which is more based off of React framework. And there's a couple, and Polymer was the Google one that came out. But that's where I'm seeing a lot of innovation in web development happening right now, and largely going unnoticed.
Thanks for listening. You can always connect with us at skiplist.com.